welcome. I am Dr. Christopher Witt. I'm the Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the University of Denver, and I just wanted to take a moment to welcome you all who are here with us in the Commons, as well as for the folks who are joining us virtually. We're so happy that you're here. It's so vital to the work that we do as a university when we think of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and particularly when we think about the whole idea of building our foundation on justice, that we lean in to so much of the good work, all of the good work that's done by the folks in IRISE, such a vital part of our DEI team. And when we think about really that scholarly inquiry intersecting with those community connections, that was one of the things that I have to admit, over a year ago, when I was considering coming here and then coming here a year ago, that was something that really piqued my interest. The fact that we had that scholarly undergirding in a lot of the work that we do. So I'm so happy for you all to be here. I welcome you, and I thank you for your participation, your engagement, and your continued engagement as we move on through today and we move into the next 2 days after that with the summit. So once again, thank you. And for the folks who are physically here, there are QR codes posted in a few spots where you can get more information about the rest of today, as well as the events for the next couple of days. And we'll also be having information posted on the screens as we move between events. So now I'm going to turn it over to one of our newest colleagues, Marinka.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're super excited to be a part of the summit this year. My name is Marinka Swift. I'm the inaugural Associate Director for IRISE, though IRISE, as the Interdisciplinary Research Institute for the Study of Inequality, has been around much longer than I have, over a decade now. And this is the first year, though, that we are invited to kick off an event like the summit. And what better way to start that off than with a teach in to teach out, very much in alignment with what IRISE is all about bridging the resources and the skills, the talent, the knowledge of, I should figure out how to turn off those notifications, of academia, of DU, with community partners who are out there really engaging in activism. And so that is going to be one of the folks we're going to hear from today for our teach-in to teach out with Ian Thomas Tafoya. Ian is an activist. He's a scholar, he's an activist. He's been fighting for human rights in many different ways throughout the country. Right now, he's actually in the middle of a tour, and maybe he'll have time to chat with you a little bit about that. And he is the voice of those who are unheard. Ian is a local in the Denver area, and his work really focuses on identifying and advocating for justice where injustice is taking place locally here in the Denver and Colorado area. He's currently an affiliate with GreenLatinos. He's also the co-chair of the Colorado Environmental Justice Task Force. And so he'll introduce himself in more detail. And before we get started with the events officially, I wanted to make sure that we also take time to acknowledge where DU sits physically, historically, I think emotionally and mentally for many folks, to remember that the University of Denver resides on lands that are held in stewardship by the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes. It is with much gratitude that we recognize the descendant communities of the Northern Cheyenne Tribe of Montana, the Northern Arapaho Tribe of Wyoming, and the Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. And remember that it is through their sacrifices that we are able to engage in learning and collaboration to further the study of higher education. And you can learn more about the Sand Creek Massacre and John Evans' report at the link there, and we'll make sure all these links are accessible when we post this recording on our IRISE website. So, without further ado, Ian, please join us.
Around kind of person. How's everyone doing this morning? Good? Okay, that's good. It's always good to have some energy in the room when you're standing up to talk in front of everybody. Well, my name's Ian Thomas Tafoya, as you heard. That's me in a tie. I don't wear a tie so much anymore. I like to wear my bolos and stuff, mostly because I'm about embracing my culture. And you just
heard this great conversation with the land acknowledgement, which I think is really important, right? Land acknowledgement is about remembering that people like me are descended from genocide, as this conversation is happening right now with Ukraine and other places around the globe. I want you to know my grandfather is one of 3,000 living Apaches, okay? So I'm descended from that, and we are still in this state of Colorado, and I think one of the important things people need to realize is there's a lot about erasure, right? Have you ever really thought about how everyone here calls themselves a Colorado native, even if they've only been here for 100 years? That's to erase what a real native person is, yeah? So with that being grounded in, I just really appreciate it. I think a lot of universities were given a lot of land that was taken away from people. And I think every time there's an opportunity to acknowledge that's really important. But I think the other thing that I was really excited about that is really grounding into what my elders teach me about being a water protector. And what does it mean to be a water protector? It means two things. It means that you have an understanding that water is moving through everything. And as a result, you have a duty, an obligation, a responsibility to make sure that everyone has access to that pure water. And the other is ensuring that it stays pure itself, right? And sometimes that means doing a trash cleanup. Sometimes that means thinking twice about what you put down the drain, or saving your gray water and pouring your cup out for a tree. And sometimes it means acts of self-defense, whether that be for individuals at Standing Rock or the self-defense of advocating and fighting for legislation, right? If you look at what's happening with water, as the headwater state, we know that there's less of it. We know it's very polluted. We know it's in our own bodies. And we know that there are really simple tools that you can exercise in a democracy to actually make that change. And so I'm hoping to chat with you just a little bit today about my journey, I think, and a journey for you to exercise your power as a person here in Colorado. You know, the first thing I guess I'd start with is, whoever here has been to Washington, D.C.? Has anyone here been to Washington, D.C. to advocate on issues that you care about? It's interesting. I got a chance to go there the first time a few years ago. I was brought there by a nonprofit called Earth Justice Legal Aid Foundation to testify against Suncor, the refinery. And I had a chance to meet the company I work for, GreenLatinos, there, and I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. But the thing that I leave away from DC every time I go there is, these people aren't going to solve our problems, okay? If you have a feeling that somebody in a faraway land has your best interests at heart and is going to solve your problems, they're not. And so I really encourage you to center yourself in this idea today that there are tools you can exercise in the city and county of Denver, in your community, in your neighbor, in the capital city that we happen to live in, that can have far-reaching impacts on your life. And because water is connected to Colorado, can have far-reaching impacts on other people's lives. And when I say headwater state, do most people think they know what that means? Headwater state means the water originates here, y'all. It comes from here. We're the only other state other than Hawaii where the water actually doesn't flow in, it only flows out. And so when you talk about 7 rivers, all these tributaries, that water is feeding millions of people. It's also watering a lot of grass in other parts of the country. But it is water that originates here, and that we have like I said, a deep obligation. And I get asked a lot in my environmental justice work about hope. Like, what gives you hope? I don't really see it as hope. I see it as an obligation. And when you see it as an obligation, it gives you a different mindset to wake up and to do it. And to do it with pride, and do it with honor, and maybe not feeling like giving up, because you got to keep putting one foot in front of the other. So when it comes to, just a little bit of my personal story and how I got to be the Colorado Environmental Justice Task Force member, and honored to be one of the leaders in the state of Colorado, it was kind of a windy road. And I hope that if you're listening in, or if you're sitting in your seat and you're like, I'm not sure what I want to do when I get out of college. Well, I went to school for 8 years, and I didn't know what I wanted to do after college either. But I think a good place to start, and it's this month, is Earth Day. And my birthday is Earth Day. And I don't know if that's like a chicken or an egg kind of thing. You know, like, if someone was born on Earth Day that's like 65 years old and they didn't have Earth Day, would they be as big of an environmentalist as me? Or because I was born at the time in which everybody, including all my teachers, had activities about service and service above self and caring about the planet, that perhaps that had an influence on me. So at the end of the day, I probably spent every year since I was in kindergarten celebrating my birthday and working on my birthday, working to put on bicycle rallies or give away seeds or get people excited or to have art projects. And it really had an influence on me because I wanted to be a teacher. That was all I wanted to be as a kid. And so when I got the opportunity to do a teaching, I was like, all right. Every time I get invited to the universities to teach, I always feel so honored, right? Because I do have training as an educator up to high school students. And so when you start talking about training adults, it's a different skill set. But I'm really always so honored when I get that opportunity. And so I worked with kids my whole life, like my whole young life. I worked at rec centers, the Museum of Nature and Science as a teacher assistant, taught kids how to play sports, taught kids civics in school, and it was a wonderful career. And I felt very fortunate that I was doing my civic duty, and I'll be honest, I didn't go to the Capitol ever. I never made a phone call for anybody. But I played a lot of Frisbee in the park, and I taught kids all day, and I thought that was doing all right, which it is, right? And I think my story is going to probably sound like, whoa, he's doing a lot. And it's been a journey. But it all started in one public meeting. And who here has ever testified at a public meeting before? Yeah, I see some hands up here. It can be stressful, right? Even when you're in a really empty room. So I got sent on a class assignment to the Denver Parks and Recreation Board. And I was the only one in the room outside of 20 people who I didn't know who they were. You hardly ever know who these people are, but they're probably important, right? Because they got picked for some reason to be important enough to be there and make decisions. And they're like, you can testify if you want. And I was like, nah, I'm all right. They're like, come on. And I was like, okay. I got up there and I was like, I play a lot of Frisbee in the park. And drink a lot of IPAs in the park. And how come I can't recycle them? And they were like, well, not really a priority for us. I was like, what? Everybody who plays Frisbee with me wants to recycle, right? And so I was a student at Metropolitan State University. Shout out Roadrunners. What an amazing, fantastic school that is for training people in our community. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I think we have the most amount of students that stay in Colorado. So our network is large, and it's full of a lot of people in the community doing good. And I was involved on campus. I was a student. I cared about environmental things. Like I told you, Earth Day. Why don't we have composting on campus? Why don't we have bike lanes? Right? Not exactly an environmental justice rhetoric. Environmental rhetoric, yes. And I said, I went back to campus and I was sitting around in the clubs and I started complaining to people. And I was like, they don't want recycling in the parks. Can you believe that? And they're like, oh no, hell no. So we started petitioning. Has anyone here ever collected a petition before? All right, so there's the really official petitions where people have to be voters. Well, we didn't have that kind of petition. I've worked on those petitions, but that's not where we started. We literally started with we wrote down what we wanted. And I think that that's the first step I really want you to think about when you start thinking about environmental justice and all of the issues that have come forward that we're going to talk about that you want to work on. You have to be centered in what your demand is, right? And it starts by talking to people. And so my demand was I wanted recycling. And I went and said to other people, I said, do you want recycling too? And they're like, hell yeah. So we collected 600 signatures. And I went back the next month to a board. I told you I was scared to testify. And I was kind of indignant. I was like, here's 600 people who care about recycling. And they're like, that's cool. Next person. And I was like, man, I went back and I was like, I don't think they're hearing us. So we went back again with another 600 and did that 5 or 6 months in a row. And if you live here in Denver County and you've seen a purple dumpster in any of those in the parks, that was my first policy win. It made me believe that it was really possible to influence things and that you didn't need a lot of power. You need a lot of money. You just needed people who are willing to be grounded in what they were fighting for and to take action steps to do it. And so after I graduated college, I got asked by the mayor of Denver to go work for him. I finished top of my class at Metro State, and I was like, okay, like, let's see what this is about. And it was just a part-time gig. I was gonna work on an urban agriculture project, writing policy for people. And what I learned is you can write really, really good ideas and then get put on a shelf like a book and never pulled off again unless the political will is there. And I learned a couple really important things in that space over the years. One of my people who actually taught me how to write my very first brief, I remember he wrote it and he goes, "This is shit." He's on the EJ task force with me. He works for the industry now. I battle with him. But it's interesting how the people that you may work with now may appear in your life again somewhere else. I just want you to think about that, like in the back of your head, about how you treat people, even if you don't agree, how you can maintain a relationship with people and be respectful when we're needing to do the hard work later, yeah? So I'm in the mayor's office. They're telling me they care about the environment. I'm like, look, this is the best. These are the best programs. Like, this is what you should pass. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. And then a new person came in, got a new job, and he was like, yeah, this is shit. And he put it on the wall. And what I learned at that moment, and I'd love for you to take this away when it comes to policy advocacy, is that, you know, is it fiscally possible? Is it legally possible? Is it politically possible? Okay? And you got to think of that as like a rock, paper, scissors. If it's legally possible and it's financially possible because there's money in the budget, politics are really easy, right? If people really want it and it's legal already, you can make the money come together. If it's not legal and you don't have the money, that's where you got to pass new laws. That's where it gets more difficult. That's where you have to pound the pavement and convince people to do the right thing. So they put it on the shelf, and I was like, you know what, F this, I'm out of here. And I took a job at city council. So in city council and at the Capitol, and also at the United States Capitol, there are staffers. They're called legislative services usually. They're people who make sure the meetings run, everything's on time. I'm the person you called at 3 in the morning when you're mad you got a parking ticket on Cesar Chavez Day. That happened a lot. People are like, what is this? It's not a holiday. Or they would get a ticket on Columbus Day. But it's not a holiday in Colorado or in Denver, right? So they get their ticket. They say hateful things. But I also learned how to work with 13 council members, 13 different personalities. Truthfully, the gentleman who represented Denver University at that time had all of his emails printed out every day. Didn't really know how to use a computer. There's a wide variety of people who are in leadership. And I guess that's the point I want to take away from you, right? People at different stages of development. Some people are elders. Some people don't really want to be there, really, but they like the title. Some people work really, really, really hard, but they don't have the votes to pass what they want. You got to learn to work with all of them if you want to achieve the policy change. You got to learn to challenge them. You got to learn to pep talk them. It requires interpersonal skills to pass politics. I, for a long time, used to get angry and just want to leave, right? And I'm sure people have been that way in a personal relationship or whatever. You're just like, I'm tired of this. I'm tired of you. I'm tired of this coalition. I could do so much more without you. But you got to remember to lead, not leave. You don't like the situation, lead. Convince and put the extra work and talk to the people, because those people who you're working with have committed a fair amount of resources. They developed a lot. And if you can keep that body of work moving forward instead of putting it on a shelf and trying to write a new book from scratch, I think we're going to get a little bit further. So at this point, I'm working for legislative services, and this is when I start to understand environmental justice. And I grew up in an environmental justice community, but I didn't know it. From my mother's front yard, you can see a smokestack. I didn't know that meant I lived in an environmental justice community. I grew up in North Denver, and my mother's front yard was a remediated Superfund site. What made it, well, if you don't know what a Superfund site is, it means it's the worst kind of soil pollution there is. So bad so that those people in Washington, D.C. I was talking about, they care. And why was my community a Superfund site? Well, lots of legacy environmental racism, of putting some people in some communities next to industry. That's reality. But We celebrated as a community blowing up a factory. Like literally, who watches that on TV? They see them blow up a building, right? Well, guess what happened to all those people when the 9/11 towers came down? They got sick. Those buildings are full of toxics. So they blew up this old smelter that was making metal, and they poured metal all over an already low-income community, already a community filled with other kinds of toxics. And then we celebrated it, right? And now we're still dealing with it. And even when they went to clean it up, they didn't clean it all up. They cleaned it up for the people who fought for it. They didn't clean it up on all the businesses. But now those business properties are worth more than they ever were. And so they're coming back for it. And how do we make sure that that stuff gets cleaned up? It takes big effort. So as I think about environmental justice communities, I think about different types of communities. And the actual definition for the Environmental Justice Act includes a couple different pieces. It includes people who are linguistically isolated. Imagine you lived in a country or in a community where even the things that are supposed to keep you alive, like safety information during COVID, during a fire, toxics in the soil, air, and water, are not in a language you can understand. And even if they are in a language you understand, are they in plain language for you to understand what it may be doing to you? Warning, this is dangerous and toxic. Maybe you live in a community, like a lot of us in Colorado now, where you are housing burdened. Am I the only one that thinks it's hard to get housing in Colorado? No. It's challenging. And so if you're spending all your time working, struggling to get by, it makes it even harder for you to participate. The meetings are at 1 o'clock. The meetings are right now, like this meeting right now. Not everybody from my community certainly has the ability to participate in that. And then we come back to, again, communities that are racially segregated. Now, there are histories of racial segregation in zoning laws in these areas. But my friend Arn here, he's here from Aspen right now. Guess how many people of color live in Aspen? Not very many. When you go to rural Colorado, it's even more segregated than it even appears here in the city. Down Valley communities commuting lots of hours to do the work. Up Valley for people who are environmentalists. My job is often to try to bridge those communities together, to help these people up Valley understand their impacts, to advocate for justice for those down Valley, and to bring them together into the conversation and find ways to compensate. Some might call it reparations, but if you're helping people make compensation to come learn about tools to improve their public health and teach them civics, it's a win-win for everybody. And that's a lot of what we advocate for. So I'm gonna take you back again to 2012, 13, and I'm working for Denver City Council, and I'm being disillusioned to a system that I was really excited to work for. A government for and by the people that steals tents from the poor. A government for and by the people that will spend billions of dollars building concrete jungles but can't supply housing or parks or community gardens or water filters to our schools. Our priorities are misaligned. And one thing that I learned when I was in the mayor's office and again in city council is that a budget is a moral document. How we choose to spend our money shows what our priorities are. It goes beyond the rhetoric. It's really easy to say, it's time to take on climate change. It's really easy to say it's time to take on toxics. But the real way we do it is through the budgets. The real way we do it is ensuring that not only is it in the budget, but that women and minority-owned businesses are going to get access to those dollars. That we're transferring that capital to the communities that have been harmed so they're building and supporting their own solutions that they've asked for. So I'm at City Hall. They want to widen the community. I'm like learning about Superfund sites and how they blew this factory up and that there's a refinery there and that there's wastewater issues. And I'm like, oh my God, this is massive. And that deep breath I took right there, I think is the sigh that so many in my community take when they open up the bill for their kids' asthma attack. when they get laid off again because they missed another couple days of work because they had to stay home with their kids, or they have terrible migraines, or their grandma's dying of leukemia. Or sadly, you took off too many days to go to funerals for people in your community. This is really what happens, and it's culturally challenging, I think, because I'm working in the city council, and the people are telling me, like, didn't she just take off last Thursday for her cousin? And I'm like, damn, yeah, she did. We have like 14 cousins. And that's how our culture is, and we want to show up for our families. And in the dominant culture, it's not always the case, right? It's about yourself. It's about your nuclear family. But that's not our culture. And so I decided to leave my job at 28 years old and run for Denver City Council in opposition to a highway expansion, in opposition to the criminalization of the poor. And I did it without a car, with signs on my bike. And I ran for 100 days, and we didn't win, but we challenged the most well-funded incumbent in the history of Colorado. And since then, we, the people, have gone back to create a matching fund. And my $40,000 that I raised in 100 days would be over $300,000 this year. So we have given the tools to our community to fight back. Okay, so run for city council. Who here has ever felt like they've been retaliated against for speaking up in a job? I have. Retaliation sucks. And in politics, it's even more real. And I had it in my mind that people would support a young person who believed and followed their values. That's what the American dream is supposed to be about. But no, when you challenge the powerful in privilege for their power, and to challenge where their profits are going, they challenge you back. And so it became hard to return to the level of advocacy I was doing in a paid way. Making good money at 26, 28 years old. And I was applying for jobs that were identical jobs for the Regional Transportation District, for the Roaring Fork Transit Authority. I mean, across the state of Colorado, and you'd get there so close. No, you couldn't get it. And finally, and I didn't realize this at first until my grandma pointed this out, but one government agency told me I didn't pass the writing exam. I was a valedictorian at my university. I didn't pass my writing exam. And it took me a couple weeks to think about it. And my family was like, you know, they use writing exams to stop people from voting, right? They use these tools of power as a way to dismiss you of the work you're doing. And it was at that point I said, you know what? We got to fight for more. We can't give up. And we started working for ourselves. It kind of forced me into being an entrepreneur. I worked in large events, and I made documentaries, and I learned my lessons from running ballot initiatives and my own races, and we passed a whole bunch of amazing things. Solar panels and green roofs on the biggest buildings in Denver. Funding for climate action. Funding for mental health. Funding for healthy food for kids. Expanding the park service, and most of all, democracy for the people, the one I was telling you about, that this time for the first election in Colorado history, we'll have money that is matched for grassroots candidates who want to run for mayor, Denver City Council, clerk and recorder, Denver auditor. And so that's a power that didn't exist before. And I think we're going to see this experiment holds true or not, and I hope that it does. And now I work for GreenLatinos. GreenLatinos is a national environmental justice and conservation equity organization founded in Washington, D.C. in 2008 as they were trying to pass cap and trade. Does everyone know what cap and trade is? If you're not familiar with what cap and trade is, it says we only can have so much emissions, so let's cap it. And then allow people to trade how much pollution they put out. Good for climate action, not necessarily good if you live next to a power facility or a place that produces the pollution. In fact, they may trade so many that you get more pollution in your community than you even had before. And so they were like, whoa, we got to do something about this. And there were groups like the NAACP. There were different groups of people of color who were working and fighting back. And environmental organizations. And Green Latinos was born of this saying, nothing about us without us. To network, empower, and engage people in Washington, D.C. in the beginning, people who worked for the Department of Energy, people who worked for the president, people who worked for the Capitol, so that they could work together, know what was going on, nip things in the bud, advocate for the right policy, and they did that for a lot of years. And then as people started coming to Washington, D.C., they made connections in states across America. And a few years ago, actually 3 years, May 1st, Green Latinos came to Colorado as the first state-based program in the United States. Why did we come to Colorado? Well, we're the headwater state, impacting so many from the center of the country. The policy and the rhetoric in Washington, D.C. are a couple things. One, anytime you want to say something is bad, think about the jobs. They try to own this conversation about people, but we are the people. And those families, for the people who work in those businesses, they're people too, in the community. And so we've tried to steal back that narrative of saying it's not people versus people, it's profit versus people. And there's money out there to reek back from Wall Street to do the right thing to take on climate crisis or environmental justice. The other thing that they try to tell you is that it's only the coastal elite that care about environmental justice or environmental things. And granted, I don't call them the coastal elite. That's their rhetoric. One thing that I've learned also in my work that I'd love for you guys to really think about is there is a psychology to using the words of your oppressor or your opponent. So if think of Obamacare. You already lost if you called it Obamacare because it's the Affordable Care Act, and Obamacare comes with so much negative connotation that's built into the words you're having. I'll give you an example here in Denver. They like to call it the homeless sweep. So we're just sweeping away. No, it's traumatic displacement. They're traumatically displacing people and destroying property. And if we get into a debate publicly and we're like, we got to stop these sweeps, then people don't understand what it really is. And so that's what they try to do with saying that there's no need to make change here in the middle of the country. And so by being leaders in Colorado and shining bright, we break down their narrative. That people in the flyover country that Trump calls it, or the Midwest that others call it, or the Southwest, we do care about these issues. We have been infected by legacy redlining and racism. We do want to see change. We do know that it's happening, that the snow is disappearing from the mountains, right? We do know that we have some of the worst air quality in the United States. We do know we have the most contamination of some water toxics in the whole country. And it starts here. And it ends somewhere else in someone else's community. And so Green Latinos came here and they called me and they said, hey, we know that you're doing lots of cool stuff and you're running your own business, but we'd really love it if you come work for us. And I said, let's do it. Let's go educate adults. Let's go educate the youth. Let's go across the state of Colorado and let's take on toxics and environmental justice. And we started. And now 3 years later, there's 4 employees here in Colorado. We're growing. We're going to Texas. We're empowered. We're networked, like I said. And yes, I'm on a tour. So I'm going to pivot really quickly to talk about the tour. And how am I doing on time, Tom? Okay, I think that's going to be good. We'll have time for some questions. So the Environmental Justice Task Force, created by the Environmental Justice Act, brought forward by the community, and passed by some of the most brilliant women legislators I've ever met in my life, who had the conviction to challenge the system, who were attacked and belittled, but triumphed on the last day. So the Environmental Justice Act, 2 critically important parts of it, yeah? One, it was the vessel for climate action that the powers that be couldn't pass on their own. And what's the lesson there? When you lead with environmental justice, you win. When you lead with justice, you win. When you lead with protecting people, you win. So all these people in politics say you got to play it safe, they're wrong. All these people say you got to take the middle ground, you're wrong. We don't have the time, number one. And number two, I think people deep down inside, they want people who have the passion to produce real solutions for our community. And so the Environmental Justice Act does a couple really cool things. Created the Environmental Justice Task Force, which allows us to restructure the Department of Natural Resources, Colorado Department of Transportation, Colorado Department of Agriculture, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, the Public Utilities Commission, the Office of Energy. I might be missing a couple. It's a lot. Huge opportunity for us to dig in and say, what are your policies and procedures for rulemaking planning? Is there an equity analysis? Do you even have any of that in your decision-making documents, right? So having worked in the government, I get it. You're looking at 100 permits a day. You want to make sure they're all treated the same. So you have a guiding document and you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Well, if equity's not in there, your outcomes aren't going to be equitable. And so we've demanded, maybe some would say requested, all of the rulemaking, planning, procedure, permitting processes, all the authority they have, and we're going to try our best to make sure every single one of those things has a change in it. But this Environmental Justice Act that I was telling you about, thank you so much, Representative Dominique Jackson. She actually now leads the housing and urban development for our whole region with the federal government. I really believe in her, from Aurora, Colorado. Polis said he was going to veto it. The governor said he was going to veto it. So what did we do? We went to his neighborhood and we flyered it. And I was inspired to do this by an activist who actually works for Conservation Colorado at Protégete. Well, actually, Lorena doesn't work with Protégete, I don't think. But during COVID, in Chicago, they were moving an asphalt facility without a permit from one community to her community. And the local elected leader, I think they're called aldermen there, like the council member, wouldn't call him back. So they flyered his neighborhood, and he called like 4 hours later. And I was like, oh man, like that's the tool, like right? Like in Boulder, whether or not they have the best environmental record, they think they do. And perception matters in politics. For people who are wishy-washy or moving down the middle and they're worried about if they're going to get elected. So we're like, all right, let's go tell all these people in Boulder how bad you are at environmental politics, Polis. And we said, you know, we're going to be back in 14 days. And we're going to be back here. If we don't hear from you. We went to 11 cities, flyering, knocking doors, thousands of phone calls, ads, the media, and we came back. We marched on his house with his own council member, his own county commissioner, his own state legislator, and in the last day, in the last 2 hours, Dominique Jackson used procedural rules like I'd never seen before to skip around and move around pieces to pass the Environmental Justice Act. Wouldn't have been possible without courageous leaders. Wouldn't have been possible without regular people who were just fed up and wanted to make a phone call. So now this Environmental Justice Task Force is meeting through November, and we need your participation. We need you to tell people about it. There's surveys out there you can take. There's public comment you can make. And I'll be on the other side of it being like, hey, what's up? Is this your first time public comment? Cool. Because I've been there. It started for me there in a meeting just like that. So if you've done it a million times, come through. If you've never done it before, come through. So now this tour that I'm on is called the Take on Toxics Tour. I actually just got back from Trinidad, straight here from Trinidad. 20 states this time, or 20 cities, excuse me. And what are we trying to do? Capitalize off the success that we had last year. And instead of just passing one bill, let's pass a bunch of them that are related to each other. So what I found in January, maybe February, a lot of really amazing, talented organizers, doctors, policy advisors, lawyers, working on individual bills and not talking to each other. Electric school buses to take diesel out of interactions with our kids. Filters for water fountains in recreation centers and schools and childcare centers. Banning forever chemicals in products. Disclosing what is in fracking fluid, ensuring that those that protect the animals and wildlife with Department of Natural Resources value the lives and the impacts of toxics for these creatures, because they're actually the canary in the coal mine. Reining in what happens with multiple wells all being drilled next to each other. Right now, you drill one well, and you're like, oh, very small emissions. What happens if every single one of these chairs is a well? That's what it's like in Weld County. That's what it's like in Texas. That's what it's like in Southeast Colorado. And the final bill, one that I'm very proud of, which is fulfilling promises from the federal government from 1970 and 1992. Who here has heard of ozone? Right, it's an ozone day. When they passed the Clean Air Act, they said, we're going to regulate all this shit in the air. They picked 6 things to start with, and they said, we'll be back for more. And they never did. They came back in 1992, and they were like, oh, with the Dems in power, we got a real chance to come back there. We're going to finish what we started 20 years ago. They didn't. And that brings me back to what I was saying to you, is that we can't wait for the federal government to ban toxics, to send us the filters to get the water out of our kids' schools. We have to set it up ourselves. And so there's an 1244, the air toxics bill would create our own program to set real limits on what's healthy or not from the polluters. So all these bills together, we're calling the Take On Toxics Tour, right? If you care about water or you care about air, let's care about all of them together. Let's organize together. So far, like 300 people around the state, but organizers and community members have turned up. If we can get each one of them to testify one time, write 2 letters, that's the power. That's the people power. We wouldn't have been the first environmental justice coalition to intervene at the Water Quality Control Commission, the Air Quality Control Commission, if we weren't using people power. I'm going to take questions in here in just a second, but the last thing I want to leave you with is that there are 4 branches of government. They only tell you about 3 in school, but the 4th one is you. You can write your own petition, can make your own phone call, can show up to testify. It doesn't have to be a legal petition. You can be a water protector and pick up the things in your community, but if you sit by and you say only those in power in this political process can change it, you're underestimating yourself. I believe in you. And I can tell you, you're not alone. And if you are alone and you're feeling stressed out, this comes back to being a water protector. Go to the water. Build a relationship with it. Put your hands in it. It heals you. My ancestors tell me that you're carried in water. It heals you. Don't be afraid of the dark. You're carried in the dark. Why do you cry if water doesn't heal you? So I'm going to go to questions, but the last thing I want you to do is close your eyes. And I want you to think of your first memory of water. For some people, it's playing in puddles. For some people, it's a storm. For some people, it's a bathtub. For some people, it's a pool. But if you're taking all of it in and you're internalizing it all, if you're internalizing the fear about the International Panel for Climate Change report, the fear that we can't get it done, go back to that happy place and take 3 breaths. And open your eyes to a new world that has you empowered. So I think we maybe have 10 minutes left. Happy to take questions about environmental justice. I guess I have one more thing, and I just want to say this. The thing that I've learned about injustice is it thrives in the borderlands. And that's what I'm going to be talking about at lunch in the next panel. But when you start to think about climate migration, if you start to think about zoning and mixed use versus residential, when you start to think about federal regulation versus local regulation, that's all borderlands. So that's just a teaser for what we're going to talk about in the roundtable. If there's no questions, Tom was going to ask a question, I think.
you know, these in-person events, you know, I think for the first time, people need to figure out how to get their voices. So encourage everyone to make a comment. Ian, thank you. Just really thoughtful ways to think about how to engage in this work. I have a kind of a big picture question. I'm curious from your vantage point, what you think about terminology, right? And so we build this day, right, as an engagement and a teach in to teach out around climate justice. Is that term distinct, different than environmental justice? What does adding climate to justice do as part of this larger conversation, this larger movement, the larger ways we think about this work and partner around this work?
I think that climate justice and environmental justice can be thought of as maybe concentric circles with overlap. I don't think they have to be the same thing. I think climate justice has to do with emissions, and it can have a lot to do with reducing your overall impact. It could have to do with whether you work at a facility and you want to make sure there's a just transition, that there is a job for you that doesn't leave you high and dry in a socialized society. And I've experienced it myself. My mother was a union operator for the US West, which was Mountain Bell before it was telecommunications. She was an operator. You press 0, you got my mom on the phone. They automated her job. We lost everything. Transformed our lives very significantly. I don't think we want austerity or that for other communities. It can be the difference between transitioning away from fossil fuels, but a community fires all the teachers or they're firefighters, right? That's a climate justice issue. If you live at your house and you don't have access to good insulation or to the financial literacy to transition your home to clean energy, that's a climate justice issue. Now, environmental justice in my mind has to do with being exposed to toxics. You are in harm's way from the actual chemicals that could harm you. So if you're a worker that's being exposed or you live in a community, you could be experiencing climate justice and environmental justice at the same time. But I don't think they're always the same thing. You know, water quantity is a climate justice issue. It's really important. Water quality issues is probably more of an environmental justice issue. And so I think you have to start thinking about them in a very individualized scenario, that there's not a blanket term for each community and what they're experiencing. Right there. Well, I think in this exact moment right now, it's through the arts and it's through joy and it's through fun and it's through love. I think that there are a lot of groups coming out of COVID that were organizing people online, and a lot of it, you know, environmental group people were very passionate. And if there are 10 meetings happening a week with 10 people, or we could do one event with 100 people, that's a better use to collaboration and for community. And I think some of the skills that we figured out are, we've come up with the resources to fully invest in climate justice, so you're reaching different people. We found ways to compensate community members, and so, you know, mothers in my organization, they can come on a Saturday, do 2 hours and make $100. That could be really great for them, and they learn about oil and gas, or they learn about some of these issues that are impacting them. We found that having events on Thursday nights and Saturday mornings, or, you know, trying different times is an incredibly important part for making it more accessible to people. But the number one thing is showing up, right? Like going to Gunnison and knocking 1,000 doors in Gunnison, Colorado, that's how you engage and transform people. I think people recognize who's doing the work, and it's going to take doing work to win any of these things, whether it's ballot initiatives, organizing people, phone banking them to be in a certain place. You gotta do the work. And people wanna do the work. How many people have ever volunteered for something and you showed up and they're like, they didn't really need me here? It happens, right? People want to feel like they're part of something that's doing something. So I always try to have action as part of it, right? There's a call to action. There's a phone banking, there's a texting, there's an emailing, there's a showing up part of it that I think is the strongest tool. Go ahead.
Speaking with people who are listening to sources or really bad data, because you talked about raising awareness and flyering and getting around people, but when you're actually in dialogue with people, strategy to reach across the aisle of location.
Well, I think you should never underestimate the be well. Some people you're not going to get through to, and you can just say be well, and it's not worth your energy. I think one thing that's really interesting when you talk about Democrats, Republicans knocking doors, if you knock the door of a Republican and they say, are you a Republican? And you're like, yeah. They're like, you got my vote. You knock the door of a Democrat, they're like, are you a Democrat? You're like, yeah. They're like, tell me why I should vote for you. And then you got to put 5 minutes on the door with them, which is 5, maybe less doors that you could knock. So there's also a side of it of like creating enough space with people who are on your side too, so that you are not in an echo chamber and you can move on to have the hard conversations. I think be well is an important one. You have to find the way to talk to people about it. Like maybe they don't call it climate change, but they know they don't have as much water as a farmer, right? And I think that just comes through trial and error and observation and having conversations with people. And what I'd say with people who are in power, they're going to tell you the sky's going to fall. They've been telling us that for a long time. You don't back down. I think that's the power, right? You're like, no, I don't agree with you. We're going to keep showing up. We're going to run. We're going to march on your house, governor, right? That is a powerful thing. Now, what I also have learned about negotiating, and trust me, like I haven't been always in the Capitol, but we took on the largest bill in state history, $5 billion, and we negotiated, and we had about 30 organizations, and not all of our partners, people who didn't think it was possible, and they'd rather keep their seat at the table. And so we say, fine, don't sign the letter. Stay over there. And the powerful people, their theory of change is to be at the table. Stay at the table. They've been at it for 30 years. So when you can create the table or push them out, they're going to get in line to be at the table in a place of power. And what I learned with the speaker in particular, he ended up appointing me actually to the EJ Task Force, but what the powerful want to do is isolate you, right? You're one-on-one, the backroom deal, they want to isolate you. So we're down there at the Capitol. I never let them isolate me. I rotated in my partners. There was always 3 of us there. Then I can't say like, oh yeah, this is the deal. No, I got to go back and check with people, right? That's the power of the other people. And then at the very end, we negotiated it as the sun was going down in the speaker's office, but he wanted to meet with me at like 4 o'clock and I wasn't ready. They want to pressure you when you're not ready to make a decision. And I told them, no, I wasn't ready. And I found out from a lot of people that they were really kind of shocked, and they were like, Ian, no one's ever told the speaker to ever wait. I've been doing this for 40 years. I'm like, so what? We don't have to bow to these people. We elect these people. And I think we have to treat it that way, that they're just another person like us. And in fact, if I can be pleasant to them, because I worked in the government, even when I don't disagree with them, and I can get them over the line, that's a win. And yeah, you don't have to meet with someone just because they want to. We've definitely had hard conversations with legal firms who've represented both sides. And then the word gets back to them. They're like, we hear you're talking about us. I'm like, well, it's true. What you guys did, you represented us against the highway or whatever. Truth hurts. Well, we'd really love to talk with you. I don't owe you shit. Right? And I think that these people are so used to getting their way that you can move on and move on to the next person. And that's what I want to try to get across to you is like, there are so many people in this world, and no one person is that important. Again, it's back to all the people. So you could get yourself real worked up on trying to reach that one person across the aisle, or you can knock 10 more doors.
Thank you, Ian. We are going to take a little break. We have food, and so give us some time to set up the food, and then we will start the roundtable at 12:30.